911, what do you had to cover emergency?
My husband is dead. He has blood under his head. No. It's all bloody.
He's all bloody?
Yeah.
Where's he bleeding from?
It looks like the back of his head. It looks like somebody's been through here.
This chilling 911 call was made by Miriam Helmick on June 10th, 2018, after she found her husband dead on the kitchen floor.
Alan was on the floor in the kitchen. It looked like he had been shot in the head, and we had a bullet casing next to his body.
When officers asked Miriam if she had any doubts about who could have done it, Miriam named her stepson.
You're right. You're I like you because you're doing this.
The case took an even stranger turn when Miriam claimed to have found a note from the killer.
There's a card inside that says, "Alan's first, you're next. Run, run, run."
But the most unexpected twist came when detectives realized the killer had been inspired by the plot of a movie.
The crime scene reminded investigators of a movie scene?
After a harrowing 911 call, police in Whitewater, Colorado rushed to the scene. When they arrived at the scene, they found a situation that matched the urgency of the call. 62-year-old businessman Alan Helmick had been shot and killed.
It looked like the house had been ransacked.
At that point, she sees Alan laying on the kitchen floor on his back with blood under his head.
Alan was on the floor in the kitchen. It looked like he had been shot in the head, and we had a bullet casing next to his body. They did a very quick security sweep to make sure there wasn't a suspect still on scene.
At first glance, the house looked like it had been robbed. The drawers were open and trash cans were tipped over. It appeared to be a possible robbery homicide. After a quick look at the scene, police took Alan's wife, Miriam Helmick, to the station for questioning. She had been there when they arrived. At the station, detectives simply asked her to walk them through her day leading up to the crime.
I had some errands I need to run today, so we would meet later, so he got in the shower and got dressed.
Okay, what time did you leave?
Okay.
Miriam gave a clear account of her day and the places she visited. She even had several voice notes to support her story.
She started listing off everywhere she had been. She told us that she was calling Alan several times, was getting his voicemail.
Hi, Alan. I just want to let you know I'm going to Walmart. If you're going to meet me for lunch.
But the voice notes weren't all. She also had receipts from the places she had visited. It seemed as if she was too prepared for everything.
I think I have all the receipts in my pocket.
The evidence she provided, along with cell phone tower data, confirmed she was telling the truth. Still, police took all necessary steps to ensure she couldn't flee if she became a suspect, but they found nothing to hold her.
They take those items to check them for any kind of gunshot residue or blood spatter that might indicate Miriam had something to do with this. And those results came back negative.
To be thorough, detectives asked Miriam if Alan had any enemies or anyone who might want to harm him. The answer came back negative.
Did he have any enemies, any problems with any of his contracting work going on, any disputes? Would he share that with you if he did?
I think so. He shared a lot with me.
After speaking with Miriam, investigators returned to the crime scene and began a closer analysis. It became clear the robbery had been staged. It was carefully planned to mislead them. This led them to believe the killer likely knew Alan. While they initially suspected Miriam, her alibi checked out and she was ruled out as a suspect. But just as the case seemed to stall, Miriam dropped a bombshell that shifted everything.
In Delta. And somebody tried to torch our car.
So the car actually got torched in Delta?
This shocking incident took place just 6 weeks before Alan's murder.
They took a stick or a big like restaurant skewer and put some kind of gauze on it and stuck it down in the gas tank and lit it.
It became clear that someone wanted Alan dead, and that person had likely been watching him for a long time.
Well, Alan and Miriam had driven to Delta for the closing on their business. They were selling Alan's title company to a purchaser, and they had finished the transaction and had parked out front and collected a check for over $100,000 for the sale of this business, and got in the car. And while she's in the business, the car starts smoking.
Alan looked in the mirror and saw that the vehicle was on fire. He got out of the vehicle, went to the back of the car, and a wick was in the gas tank.
When Miriam comes out, she hears that Alan's screaming at her to bring her to get a fire extinguisher, that the car is on fire.
With that in mind, detectives circled back to the key question: who would want Alan dead?
Alan didn't have a lot of enemies, and so who would want to kill Alan in that kind of way by blowing up his car? That was a real mystery.
Detectives asked Miriam if she suspected anyone who might want to harm him.
You have no idea who would do this to you or Alan?
No, not at all. I mean, it's just weird. I don't know. We've been hashing it over last night.
Investigators reviewed records related to the case and came across a recording of an old interrogation with Alan. They played it, hoping to uncover something useful.
Do you know anyone that would have a problem with you?
I do not. Over the years, acting as I was in business in this area, there's going to be some unhappy people because I turn people down on loans from time to time. But I think I was well respected in the savings loan industry.
Mm-hmm.
There are two people that have had a problem with me.
Okay, who are those two people?
I can't imagine them being vindictive because they're too much exposed.
Right.
They do stupid things, but they're not stupid people.
In a desperate search for answers, detectives had even asked Alan if he believed his wife could be involved.
Oh, God. No, I don't think that.
Not at all.
That would be terrible. Now, why would you do that?
What would she gain if you died yesterday?
What he would get is a mess. She has nothing that was created prior to the marriage.
After going through Alan's recording and finding absolutely nothing, they were left with more questions than answers. The detectives needed to learn more about who Alan was close to, and when they asked Miriam, she pointed at someone they hadn't expected: his own son, Alan Jr.
Tell me more about Alan Jr.
He's had run-ins with the law.
What was the relationship between Alan and Alan Jr. 3 to 4 months ago?
Same.
Same
It's been
distance?
that way for many years.
Okay, kind of
Very
stay apart.
distant.
Okay.
There's some real animosity there.
Does Alan Jr. know where you guys live now?
He's been there.
Alan didn't have any biological kids with Miriam. All his children were from his first marriage. What looked like a normal blended family on paper had cracks running quietly underneath.
Miriam talked about how Alan and Alan Jr. never got along, and that there was some falling out between the two of them and some animosity.
And just when the detectives were starting to let that uneasy feeling settle in, something else came to light, something that made it impossible to push aside their growing suspicions.
And after that car fire 6 weeks earlier, Alan had also mentioned his strained relationship with his son to those investigators.
It was time to bring Alan Jr. in for questioning. The detectives were hopeful that his answers could bring them the break they'd been searching for. As they sat down with him for an interview, they could never have expected the unpredictable truth he was about to reveal.
Come on in and have a seat. And I,
Right here?
yes, that's
All right.
fine.
He's the kind of guy that if he saw something that wasn't right, he would give you his 2 cents about it, and it would not be nice. It would be sharp.
He just told it as it is.
Yeah, it's sharp. Yeah, right out.
Sure.
I know my dad's like, you're out, you're
Right.
You're right, you because you're doing this. You and Dad would give me a dime.
Okay. Did you ask?
No, I'm sure that I had back then, and then they repeated, hey, this is something you need to learn to take care of yourself.
Where were you Tuesday? Because everybody's been asked that question. And
I'm not an ignorant human being.
Right.
And I would be offended if you didn't ask those questions. In fact, I would be angry with you if you didn't ask them in that way. Would have been working on the computers. I would have been at the hostel on my computer.
In Seattle.
Despite his tough exterior, Alan Jr. was clear that he would never hurt his father. He even provided an alibi, saying he was out of state when the murder happened. With every answer, the detectives' suspicions started to fade. When the interview ended, they made their decision. For now, Alan Jr. wasn't a suspect.
No evidence linking Alan Jr. to having anything to do with Alan's murder.
With Alan Jr. ruled out, the detectives hit another dead end. Frustration began to settle in. No leads, no answers. But just when it seemed like the case was slipping through their fingers, something terrifying happened. It was a turn so unexpected, so chilling. It might just be the breakthrough they'd been desperately searching for.
She was with her friend Penny. They had just gotten back from shopping. She goes up to her front door and she sees an envelope sticking out from under the mat. And when she opens that envelope, there's a card inside that says, "Alan's first, you're next. Run, run, run."
What was written inside that envelope sent a chill down their spines. It wasn't just unsettling, it was a direct threat. It was clear the investigation had to go deeper, because whatever they were up against now was far more dangerous than they'd imagined.
She collapses to the ground, becomes very distraught.
Miriam calls me, and she's frantic. And she goes, "What should I do?" And I said, "Well, you need to hang up the phone and call the police and get out of there." I said, "Because somebody could be there trying to hurt you."
The envelope was now the center of their attention. Its contents were unsettling, raising more questions than answers.
Greeting card is turned over by Miriam to her lawyer, who then notifies the police.
I was given a copy of the card. It said, "To the grieving widow," in block letters. On the front is a picture of a middle-aged female. And it said, "Insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result." And then inside, Alan spelled A-L-L-E-N, misspelled. Your was also Y-O-U-R. A grammatical thing, okay.
Whoever left it there had cut out the barcode, seemingly in an effort to obfuscate anybody tracing that card, where it was purchased, who purchased it, that sort of thing.
It looks like Miriam might be the next target.
Maybe there is somebody out there who really wants to kill Miriam as well.
The envelope turned out to be a solid lead. The investigators hoped they could trace where the card was sold, and that meant a specific manufacturer, a city market, and maybe even security footage. For the first time in days, they had a direction, and they were about to follow it.
They got in touch with the manufacturer of the card. He was able to tell them where these cards were sold.
I checked the Hallmark, I checked the Hobby Lobby. We finally get to the city markets. I contacted their loss prevention guy, and they found 2 sales. One person paid in cash, didn't know who that person was. The other one was with a credit card. So we had a name, and then he found one more purchase. He called me and he's like, "I've got video."
That store uses VHS tapes?
That particular store was not as up to date as their others, and they did use VHS, and they used it over and over and over again. So by the time we got this tape, it was kind of delicate.
The footage started rolling. Ordinary people going about their day, nothing unusual at first. But then, just a few minutes in, something, or rather someone, made the detectives lean in. A familiar face. Someone they never expected to see in this context. And in that moment, everything changed.
It was her. She was wearing the same style of shirt that she had walked in with her interview. It was just a different color combination.
When the detectives questioned her about it, she did have an explanation. One that was as vague as it was oddly hilarious. And if she expected it to clear things up, well, it did the exact opposite.
What Miriam told them is that she felt like the police weren't paying enough attention to the case. They weren't doing much. And so she wanted to kind of jog that with this card.
But the detectives were not buying this reasoning. Miriam was beginning to seem more and more suspicious to them. So it was time to speak to Alan's children and learn what they could about Miriam's relationship with their father. They brought Alan's son and 2 daughters in for interviews, and the children had a lot to say.
He's been completely out of character, drastically since January. It's odd for my dad. It's just
You've
not
seen
been
him
a character.
change. You've seen him change his character.
And maybe not so much see him change his character, but through her, I can't even get to him.
And every time I call, Miriam answered. Before that.
His phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
His cell phone. which I thought was weird. He always answered his phone.
All three gave the same report regarding the weeks and months leading up to his death. According to them, he'd stopped answering and returning calls, and the only way to get in touch with him was through Miriam.
Hey, Miriam, this is Christy. I've been calling my dad for about a week, and I'm not hearing back.
I'm like, well, Dad, is your home phone hooked up? He's like, no. I'm like, well, how does anybody get a hold of you? Well, Miriam doesn't want anybody to bother me.
It appeared as though Miriam had been trying to distance Alan from his kids, and she often blamed it on his health issues, but this only confused them more.
Father's never sick. My father's like an ox. And he was, every time I would talk to him, he was sick.
And did he say what he was sick from?
He didn't know. I don't think he had a clue.
But he said he couldn't even stand up. He was so dizzy.
Could Alan's inexplicable sickness have been caused by something out of the ordinary? The detectives wished to look into this further, but this was only the beginning of the information that children would reveal about Miriam. Next, they gave the police information regarding something far more suspicious.
There was the sudden loss of her daughter, and then a shocking development with her first husband.
While Miriam and her first husband, Jack, were in bed, Jack shot himself in the head.
It seemed Alan was not the first husband of Miriam's to die from a gunshot wound to the head. At the time, Jack Giles' death was ruled as a suicide, and considering that he and Miriam had lost one of their daughters just a short while prior, it had not been questioned much. But when the detectives now looked into the past case file, a few suspicious details stood out to them.
Police ruled it a suicide. There were some strange circumstances, though. Things like he used his right hand to pull the trigger. Jack was a lefty.
In addition to this, the local officer who had ruled the case a suicide had been none other than Miriam's half-brother. With every new piece of information, Miriam was beginning to look guiltier by the second. But there was still more information that children had on Miriam. What they revealed next had been told to them by one of Miriam's own friends. Just a few months after Alan's death, and with suspicion mounting against her, Miriam had begun to see somebody else.
Miriam had contacted me first. She wrote, saw your profile and loved it. I can dance, any dance, and I'm pretty good at it. Your profile requirement described me complete to a T.
She says, I'm going to go down there. I said, you what? I mean, this is just months after Alan had died. Even my girls were like, gosh, she's dating already? And I said, yeah.
From the looks of things, Miriam had not even waited for Alan's case to be solved before she went on the hunt for her next rich husband. This was a stark contrast from the heartbroken wife that she'd tried to act as when the detectives first spoke to her. Now they were almost sure she was involved in some way. The only problem was, all the information was circumstantial at best. They had no evidence to prove her involvement, but Alan's children had one last bombshell to reveal.
One of Alan's children said she specifically remembered seeing a .25 caliber pistol in his sock drawer.
They couldn't find that gun after the murder.
A .25 caliber bullet had been used to kill Alan, but with the gun missing, they had no way to know if it had been fired from his own weapon. However, now they had a lead to chase, and if they could find the murder weapon and link it to Miriam, it would be the evidence they needed to close the case once and for all. While the police now had a decent amount of circumstantial evidence against Miriam, they were still on the hunt for something more concrete. They were able to apply for a warrant to review her phone records and computer, and what they found would leave them shaken to their core.
I recovered approximately 180 online medical searches for things such as Viagra overdose, Ambien overdose, lisinopril overdose, a combination of those three drugs mixed together, pain-killing overdoses.
I think she was looking at various ways to kill Alan.
The time frame of these searches was in the months leading up to his murder, the very same time that Alan's children had said he'd mysteriously fallen ill and had distanced himself from them. Could his sickness have been due to Miriam's attempts to get him to overdose? Though they had no way to prove this, they now wondered if Miriam had tried to kill her husband in other ways before she'd finally been successful. And that's when they realized that she could likely have been behind the failed car explosion attempt.
After all the dust had settled, our investigators started thinking about what had transpired in Delta. They thought, this sounds like the car explosion scene in No Country for Old Men. which had just come out in the last year. It was a popular movie where the villain had created a distraction by lighting a magazine, sticking it into the gas inlet, and exploding the car.
The investigators were sure this was where the inspiration had come from, considering the movie's popularity at the time. They decided to look into Alan and Miriam's cable bill, and what they found would confirm their darkest suspicion.
As police are looking into this, they discovered that the Helmicks had rented that movie about 4 days prior to the incident.
The links were too clear to ignore. Miriam had been looking for any possible way to get rid of her husband, and when they'd all failed, she had resorted to the most foolproof method she could think of, Alan's gun. But how could the investigators prove this? They had no idea where the gun could possibly be hidden, and no clue where to start looking for it. But then, when they were beginning to lose hope, one of Alan's children reached out and mentioned a story from 1989 involving that same gun that gave them a sliver of hope.
My grandfather went a little crazy and tried to shoot my grandmother in their front lawn one day.
According to Alan's daughter, a neighbor had intervened and her grandfather had ended up shooting downward into the lawn. The detectives now came up with a bold plan. They'd search this property to see if the bullet from this incident could be found in the ground and try to compare this to the bullet that was used to kill Alan. It was a long shot, but this was their only chance.
We went out there with metal detectors, and after some time we were able to locate the bullet.
Are you kidding? You found a bullet that had been fired in 1989? Amazing. We don't get those sorts of breaks.
Against all odds, they were actually able to locate the bullet. It was immediately collected and sent to ballistics to test against the bullet used to kill Alan. But since the bullet from 1989 had been in the ground for 20 years, it had degraded quite a bit. The test results would take time, so the detectives began to look into what Miriam's possible motive could be for taking Alan's life. And they knew just where to start. When they'd searched the house after the murder, they'd found a number of checks totaling over $40,000 addressed to Miriam that had all been signed by Alan. At the time, as Miriam had been cleared due to the alibi she'd presented, they hadn't thought to look deeper into these checks. But now that she was under suspicion, they needed to make sure they were real. And when the checks were examined by forensics, something very quickly became clear.
There were suspicious bank account activity where it appeared that Miriam had forged multiple checks from Alan's account. All told, she had taken about $40,000 out of his account through writing those checks.
It seemed the motive had been simple after all. It had been sheer greed for money. Not satisfied with the life insurance payout from her first husband's death, Miriam had decided she needed more, and Alan had paid the price. What the detectives found even more chilling was the fact that just a few months after Alan's murder, she had found another rich man to chase after. They were now certain they were dealing with someone who could very likely be looking to kill again in the future. They needed to lock her away for good. And then the results of the ballistic testing came back.
I was able to determine that the bullet recovered from the yard corresponded with the bullet from the victim in number of land and groove impressions and their widths. I was able to determine also that the fired bullet from the yard was a right-hand twist. My result was that the two bullets could have been fired by the same firearm.
This was what the detectives had needed. Even though it was not a 100% definitive match, they believed that along with all the circumstantial evidence, it would be enough to take Miriam to trial and get a guilty verdict. 6 months after the death of Alan Helmick, Miriam was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder for the car fire, and forgery. Soon after, in November 2009, the case went to trial. The prosecution presented their timeline of the murder, stating that Miriam had shot her husband in the morning, then changed her clothes and showered to remove any traces of blood or gunshot residue. She then disposed of the clothes and the gun in some unknown location, and then set off on her errands to establish her alibi before heading to the Chinese restaurant and leaving the message for Alan. She had then returned home and called 911, pretending to be a distraught wife. They also stated how she'd been behind the failed car bombing attempt, citing the cable bill as circumstantial evidence. The defense was confident that this wouldn't be enough, but the prosecution also had an ace up their sleeve: the testimony of one of Miriam's friends who recalled a conversation between the two of them just days after the failed attempt.
She had said that she found out that
a car won't explode if it has a full tank of gas.
And when she said that, what was her demeanor?
She laughed.
That catch you off guard?
Pretty much.
The testimony from her friend only strengthened the prosecution's case that Miriam had been behind the car bombing. But then the defense did something unexpected. They called Miriam to the stand in her own defense.
Once you got inside, what did you see?
I saw Alan on the floor. I dropped my bags and went to him. He was cold and gray. I held his hand for a few minutes and tried to make some sense of it all.
Miriam was on the stand for 2 days, speaking in her own defense, and it seemed like her statements were causing some doubt within the jury. The prosecution was now worried, but they made a daring move when they got a chance to cross-examine her. They shifted focus away from Alan's murder to the infamous card that Miriam had admitted to sending herself.
You were just acting at that time, weren't you?
Yes, just briefly.
You concocted a complete ruse to lead them on a wild goose chase away from you and towards some phantom killer out there, correct?
If they'd actually had contacted me or listened, then maybe I wouldn't have been at that point.
Finally, after 16 days of testimony, in December 2009, the jury sat down to deliberate, and in the short span of 5 hours, they'd reached a unanimous decision. Miriam was found guilty on all counts, but in an interview after the verdict, she had a lot more to say.
Prosecutors say that you fraudulently had written about $40,000 in checks on Alan's money, that he was about to find out, and that's why you killed him.
He could look up online anytime and see what was coming out of his bank account. Nobody stopped him from doing that. So anything that was written with his approval.
Did you steal any money from Alan?
No, I didn't take anything from him because everything that was put into the bank went into his bank account. None of it came to me.
But when the interviewer asked her about the car fire, she made an absolutely outlandish claim.
Did you have anything to do with starting that car fire?
No, I didn't have any inclination to do it. But I almost believe that he started his own car fire.
You mean to tell me that Alan started the car fire himself? Why would he try to do that and possibly hurt himself?
Well, I don't think he thought about hurting himself. And it took me a while to wrap my head around that he would possibly do anything like that.
Miriam stated that Alan had started the fire himself for the insurance money, but as a man who already had a considerable amount of wealth, the police couldn't understand the logic behind this. When asked about the gun, she claimed she had no knowledge of it until after the murder and had no idea where it could possibly be.
Do you believe your mother had anything to do with Alan's murder?
I do not.
With your father?
I do not. No.
In all of this, Miriam's son from her first marriage, Chris, stood by his mother's side, defending her innocence. However, in the end, none of it was enough, and Miriam Helmick was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. Since then, she's made numerous appeals, but they've all been rejected. We hope that Alan's family and loved ones can find some form of peace and closure, knowing that justice has been served and his killer will never walk free again.
हाय लोगों, क्या हाल है आपके? खैरियत है? ठीक हैं? और सुनाएं, क्या कर रहे हैं? क्या हो रहा है? क्या चल रहा है ज़िंदगी लाइफ में? ये ज़रा मुझे बताइएगा। क्या चल रहा है ये तो बताइएगा आप लोग यार। लाइफ ज़िंदगी में कुछ भी चल रहा है मुझे ज़रूर बताइएगा। इसके बारे में क्या हो रहा है, क्या चल रहा है, अपने बारे में सारी इन्फॉर्मेशन दिया करो मेरे दोस्तों इन्फॉर्मेशन ज़रूर दिया करो अपने बारे में। इन्फॉर्मेशन से ही बंदा आगे बढ़ता है मेरे भाई। इन्फॉर्मेशन ज़रूरी होती है और आगे बढ़ने के लिए भी कुछ ना कुछ इन्फॉर्मेशन चाहिए होती है मेरे भाई दोस्तों। कैसे हैं आप लोग? कैसी है ज़िंदगी? लाइफ गुजर रही है? अबे मैं यही पूछा जा रहा हूँ हमेशा, लाइफ कैसी गुजर रही है, ज़िंदगी कैसी चल रही है? कुछ तो आगे पूछूंगा ना भाई, आगे ही आगे कुछ होता है ना मेरे दोस्त। आगे ही आगे कुछ बढ़ता है, कुछ आगे बढ़ाते हैं हम, कुछ करते हैं, कुछ ज़िंदगी के मज़े लेते हैं, ज़िंदगी के मज़े ज़िंदगी के मज़े हम। अरे यार मेरा कलर बड़ा बेंड हो रहा है। चलो यार अब कुछ ऐसा करते हैं जो कुछ करने के लिए सही हो, कुछ करने के लिए आगे बढ़ने के लिए सही हो, कुछ ऐसा करो यार। बढ़ने के लिए कुछ ना कुछ तो करना होगा मेरे दोस्त। दोस्ती करने के लिए कुछ ना कुछ तो होना चाहिए। मेरा एक दांत टूटा है, ये देखें, एक दांत मेरा टूट गया। अरे काला क्यों हो गया यार? बहुत तो यार एकदम से काला हो गया ये, एकदम से काला हो गया। मुझे नहीं पता लगा क्यों काला हो गया एकदम से। वैसे मेरा कलर भी डिम हो रहा है, डिम हो रहा है, डिम हो रही है कलर भैया, डिम हो रही है, डिम हो रहे हैं ना, डिम क्या कह सकते हैं यार दोस्त, डिम होता रहता है कलर। कलरिंग में कुछ ना कुछ तो फ़र्क आते रहते हैं मेरे दोस्त। हम एक वो करके देख रहे हैं, तजर्बा कामयाब होता है तो बस देखते हैं क्या होता है। देख लो यार, तजर्बा बस कामयाब हो जाए। तजर्बा करके देख रहे हैं कामयाब होता है कि नहीं होता, वो आगे देखते हैं क्या होता है। तजर्बा होता है मेरे दोस्त। आगे बढ़ के भी देखना चाहिए, तजर्बा करके भी देखना चाहिए, कुछ ना कुछ करके भी देखना चाहिए और आगे ही आगे बढ़ना चाहिए मेरे दोस्ती में आगे बढ़ना चाहिए। ज़रूरी है, ज़रूरी है, ज़रूरी है, ज़रूरी है।